Clothes for Maintenance podcast. I'm your host, Natasha Weston, and in today's episode, I kind of want to unpack a conversation I had with a friend maybe like two and a half weeks ago. And I'm going to be honest with y'all, I wasn't sure. I was not. I'm going to be honest. I was not sure that I would actually record this episode. When this friend asked me a question, it really kind of sparked a conversation that was so healthy, that was so needed. And I figured, why not? And then I also just wasn't sure how much of my business I wanted to let y'all in on, because the truth of the matter is, in order for me to unpack this, I have to be totally transparent. But here goes nothing. So in a nutshell, today I want us to talk about how to remember what God has rescued us from consistently, not in a way to be still held captive to those things, not to dwell in any type of shame, but with the overall intention of staying free from said thing or things. So again, a friend asked me a question a couple of weeks ago. We were having a conversation about, it was a very uncomfortable conversation. Let's start with that. But the conversation ended up turning out to be very, very, very positive, very helpful, and very transparent. And he asked me a question during that conversation that really made me think about how I was approaching my sin, how I was articulating how God had delivered me. And it also forced me to actually put language to what I had been practicing and exercising, not just on social media, but just in my life in general. This friend is someone that's very close to me. This person has seen me go through all of my many transitions, not just professionally, but personally. He knows a lot about me. And so as he's witnessed me on this journey, walking with Christ for real, it led him to have a lot of questions. He sees how I carry myself. He sees how serious I approach honoring the Lord. He sees how hard I am on myself sometimes when it comes to staying away from certain places, from around certain people, from doing certain things. And so I was actually quite happy that I didn't let offense set in to the point where it didn't force me to really think. So we were talking about sin, and he asked me if I aim for perfection when it comes to following Christ. He asked me if I ever consider some of the smaller, I won't say smaller sins, but the sins that are more easily just kind of overlooked, that I don't necessarily address publicly. So some examples of that could be lust. It could be unforgiveness, resentment, bitterness, pride, ego, all sins, but I don't necessarily harp on them as much as I do a couple of other things, which we'll get into. So I guess he translated my seriousness around a couple particular sins and my constant focus as me not forgiving myself for those sins, which I guess made it seem like I was kind of going through extreme lengths to avoid living my life in a certain way, if that makes sense. So I'll be honest, his question, it did catch me off guard, because for one, I don't ever want to come off as if I'm trying to be perfect in my walk with Christ. And I also realized that I actually do talk a lot about how I used to drink and how I used to have sex before I truly surrendered to the Lord. But this question also made me reflect, why do I emphasize those things so much? And do I overlook the sins that are more, I guess, accepted as far as like in our day-to-day life? They're easy to fall into, right? They don't take a lot of thought and intention to be lustful, to be prideful, to have ego, to be self-centered. It doesn't take a lot of intention to fall into those types of sin versus having sex versus drunkenness, right? And so this morning, as I was in my quiet time, I came across James chapter 4, verses 7 through 8, which says, "Submit yourselves then to the Lord. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and he will come near to you." And it reminded me that following Jesus isn't just about turning away from the obvious sins. Yes, that is very important. But it's about constantly drawing closer to him so that sin in any form doesn't take root again. And that's what I want us to get into today. So I want to start with why I highlight drinking and sex so much when I share my testimony. And this is the part that's very uncomfortable for me, because I've shared this briefly, but I didn't really get into detail. And I highlight these things because these are the things that the Lord has revealed to me since I got saved for real that would have been the two things that led me straight into damnation. And they're like domino effects of each other when I reflect on my history, when I reflect on my past. It's not because these two things are the only sins I've ever struggled with, but it's because these were the sins that literally, quite literally, would have kept me from fully surrendering to the Lord and being close with him and having intimacy with him completely. But first, I want to give you a little context because, again, I've shared my struggles with these two things before, but I don't think I've shared it to the extent that I would like to share it with you today. And before I get into it, let me just say this. If you're listening to this and you still struggle with these sins, this is in no way, shape, or form to condemn you. This is me offering my testimony as a way to share what the Lord has delivered me from. And to be totally transparent, these are things that if the enemy would want to sift me ever again, he will, and he has tried to use these two things. And so I think it's very important that you understand that I'm sharing this in love. I am sharing this from a heart posture of giving grace, because the Lord gave me grace in these areas for so many years where he could have just forgotten about me and said the heck with me because I was just so rebellious against him. And so I graduated from high school in 2006. I did my first, year of college here locally in Charleston. And then I started working a regular job, and I eventually went off to school to go to college. So I had about 2 years of college life experience. And of course, if you've ever been to college, you know that alcohol is involved. We get drunk. We go to class the next morning. That's just the way of life. During my college years, I partied a lot. And through partying, I drank a lot. That was just something so normal, so accepted. And I slept with probably way more men than I should have ever as a result of being drunk. And that pattern followed me for many years. I'll say up until I met my son's father, that pattern of drunkenness leading to sex was my story. Now, that may surprise some of you because I probably never came off to be that type of person. But that is what was happening in the background. The enemy was using alcohol, having a good time, and I was making terrible decisions. And it followed me, and it became a norm, and I allowed it, and I kept doing it, and I kept doing it, and I kept doing it. And I remember maybe like 3 years ago, I was dating this guy, and we were in a situationship, and it was just toxic. And I realized that the only time I could stomach even being around him long enough was when I was intoxicated. And that is when the light bulb kind of went off. Like, you don't actually really like these men. You're not in your right mind. You're not sober minded. That's where my journey kind of began, of getting that realization that one thing was triggering another. And the enemy was using those two things to keep me away from God. So when I started my process of surrendering to him years ago, those were the hardest things for me to shake. And I always say that donating a kidney saved my life, actually, because I was forced to take better care of my body. And as a result, I had to stop drinking as much as I was. And when you become sober-minded, you see things in a completely different light. I realized that I didn't like a lot of the things that I liked when I was intoxicated. I didn't like a lot of the same people that I loved when I was intoxicated. And to be quite frank, the people that I was hanging with were actually not fun for me to hang with when I became sober-minded. And so because I became sober through the means that the Lord allowed me to be able to donate a whole organ, he used that process to cleanse me, to really put in front of me what was keeping me away from him. And those were those two things. So I wanted to share, that's just kind of in a nutshell, my story as far as the sin that kept me away from the Lord for so many years, and how the Lord strategically allowed me to get in a position where I had to literally take better care of my body to help save my cousin's life through kidney donation, for me to sit down long enough to see what was keeping me away from him. And so some sins create habits, other sins create bondage, And for me personally, drinking and sex weren't just things I did, they were things that shaped my identity and my choices. They kept me in cycles that I could not break on my own. So maybe for you, it's not drinking or sex. Maybe it's something else. Maybe you get angry a lot more than normal. Maybe you're dishonest. Maybe you have another addiction. Maybe you seek validation from other people. Whatever it is, there's usually one thing or a couple of things that have the strongest hold on us before Christ. And when God frees us, it's not just about not doing those things anymore. It's about remembering why we need Him in the first place. And that's why I have to constantly remind myself of what God pulled me out of. Because forgetting leads to drifting, and drifting leads to falling. It's not about shame, it's about staying free. But here's why my friend's question really convicted me, y'all. What about those other sins, right? The ones that don't get talked about as much. The ones that we fall into probably all day, every day, if we're being honest. Like at some point during the day, you probably become lustful. You probably feel a little resentment. You probably are being disobedient. Even if it's not to the Lord, it could be to your boss on your job, authority that you're under. The ones that we don't really talk about as much. Because while I can confidently say I've walked away from those two things that were keeping me in sin, I still struggle with things like disobedience, knowing that God is telling me to do something, but procrastinating or making excuses. This podcast is a great example of that, right? I've known for the longest that the Lord was turning this into something that would be glorifying for Him. But a part of me still wanted to be appealing to a lot of people and not just a chosen group of people. That's disobedience, pride, thinking that I figured it out in some areas of my life. I still struggle with self-centeredness sometimes, getting caught up in what I need and what I want and forgetting to have a servant's heart like the Lord wants me to have. Sometimes I still hold on to things longer than I should. So resentment. I still struggle with these things, but these weren't the things that were necessarily keeping me from truly being saved, from truly accepting the gift of salvation and eternity with the Lord. And if I'm being real, those things I just listed, don't always feel as urgent to me as the quote unquote more magnified sins that I used to struggle with. But they are just as dangerous because they slowly will pull you away from the Lord. They slowly will. Jesus didn't just save us from our old life. He's saving us every day from the sins that try to creep up on us now, all day, every day. And that is why we have to depend on Him constantly. The Bible tells us in Lamentations 3:23 that His mercies are new every morning. Now, this tells us not if we need God's help every day. It tells us we will need it every day. And that's why He renews mercies every day. That's why He forgives us every day. That's why we need fresh mercies every day. That's just how sinful we are. So how do we make sure we don't fall back into the things that God freed us from? And how do we stay aware of these subtle sins that will try to sneak in? So let's go back to James 4, verse 7 through 8, because I believe the solution is in the Word. So let's break down that scripture that we read earlier, which says, "Submit yourselves then to the Lord, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come near to God, and He will come near to you." Well, when we ask the question, how do we stay aware of these sins, big or small, that will keep us away from God? The first thing that James 4, 7 through 8 tells us to do is what? Submit to God. This means, one, understanding that once we get saved, once we say yes to Jesus, we don't just say yes once. We're constantly saying yes. Every single day, we're realizing that we need Him for everything. This is a daily surrender. Not just when we feel strong, not just when the Lord is answering our prayers, but every single day, asking God to keep our hearts aligned with Him. This means staying in your word, reading your word, being brutally honest with God, saying, look, I am so flawed. I am so sinful. Lord, I can't control the lust. I can't control the disobedience. So Lord, help me. Give me the power and the desire to do the things that please you. James 4:7-8 also tells us to resist the devil. Now, this is where we come in at, right? We love to say, oh, the Lord knows my heart. The Lord knows. The Lord knows. Yes, he does. But he also requires us to do something. He requires us to resist the devil. This is the hard part because it's going against what our flesh wants. This is an active responsibility that we must accept. It means saying no to the things that could lead us back into the sins that we struggle with, even the thoughts that we have that could plant a seed to lead us into those things. And then James also tells us to draw near to God. The closer we get to him, the further we get from our old selves. This is going to require work, physical, tangible work on our behalf. We have gotten so lazy in just saying, oh, the Lord knows my heart. The Lord knows I need this. If the Lord has all the power, why do I have to do any work? Well, James tells us that we are required to draw near to God and he will draw near to us. That scripture tells us that there's an action required from us first before there's a reaction from the Lord. So you may be asking, well, girl, I hear you, but how does this look like for you? How are you submitting to God? How are you resisting the devil? And how are you drawing near to Christ? First things first, I guard my environment as much as I possibly can. I don't intentionally put myself in spaces that would make it easy for me to fall back into sin. And so you'll probably not see me at a bar unless a family member's having a gathering or something that I just feel compelled to go to. You will not see me at a strip club. You will not see me anywhere where it's going to be easy for me to be tempted to get drunk. I'm not saying you won't see me have a glass of wine at dinner, but you will not see me in an environment where I am compelled or the enemy can dangle shots in my face and make me think, oh, you could get away with it this one time. Let me just tell y'all, like, it's so serious to where my boyfriend had a birthday party. I didn't even go. And it was not that I didn't want to go to celebrate his birthday, but I did not want to go because I knew that although I may be strong enough to reject alcohol, I didn't want to put myself in the environment for the devil to play in my face, because that's what he does. He makes you think that you can do both. And the truth of the matter is, at some point, if you continue to put yourself in environments that do not compel you and push you to Christ, you will fall into temptation. You will. So for me, resisting the devil means guarding my environment. Is that easy? No. It's St. Patrick's Day weekend. The old me would have been out having a ball. As a matter of fact, I was laying in bed last night watching TV, and I'm on Snapchat and I'm scrolling, and a part of me felt alone. Like, wow, it's so funny how nobody calls me to go out and have any fun anymore. Like, nobody wants to hang with me anymore. Sometimes that is literally how it feels. And it's because they know that I will not step foot in certain environments that will, one, force me to compromise or put me in a position to compromise spreading the gospel, like, in a way that's effective. In church this morning, Elder Eric said that the enemy will make you think it's okay to have one foot in and one foot out, so that it pretty much can deactivate your testimony and your witness in the kingdom. Your effectiveness in the kingdom is what he said. And so when you guard your environment, when you're intentional about the rooms you won't step in, the rooms you will sit in, that is what it looks like to resist the devil. You can't know you struggle with alcohol and drinking and drunkenness, but you think it's okay to meet your friends at happy hour and you're just going to drink ginger ale. At some point, the devil will win. At some point, you're going to give in. You're going to make excuses for having one drink, two drinks, three drinks. And now before you know it, you've gone from not sinning to being drunk. And so guarding your environment is how you resist the devil. This also looks like me checking my motives. So being aware when I feel prideful, when I'm feeling resentment, when I feel selfish, and asking myself, is this drawing me closer to the Lord, or is this pulling me away from him? And being honest with him and saying, Lord, I feel resentment right now. I don't want to feel resentment. Please remove this resentment from my heart. Lord, I'm feeling lustful. Lord, I don't want to feel lustful, but I can't not be lustful in my own strength. So help me, Lord. So it's constantly checking your motives and not just pushing them to the back of your brain thinking they're just going to go away. No, speaking to those things and saying, Lord, I feel this way and I cannot shake this on my own. Help me. For me, this also looks like accountability. This is the one nobody wants to hear. When we have conversations like this, someone's trying to hold you accountable, but you hear judgment. You hear them being judgmental. So surrounding myself with people who will call me out when I'm slipping. And so back to that example about my boyfriend having this party in this environment that I knew I could not go in. He also knew, he's like, I don't want you to come. That was a way of holding me accountable, right? Of not just accepting and allowing me to be in an environment that would possibly tempt me. And so having an accountability partner, being in a community like Lost and Found, these are all ways where you can openly and transparently share the things you struggle with, so that when those people see you falling into those things or going in the wrong direction, they can say, okay, girl, you done been at happy hour twice in the last month. You sure that's a good idea? Y'all can't meet at Starbucks next time? That's accountability. It's not that people are judging you. It's not that people don't want to see you have fun. But when people know your story and they know the things that the Lord has delivered you from, it is vital for you to be around people that can pull you back into reality when the time comes. When we remember why we need saving, we stay desperate for God's presence. And that's the only way to truly stay free. And so I wanted to talk about this very briefly. I didn't want to make this long, but this conversation has literally just been playing back and forth in my mind. And when I came across James 4 this morning, it was like confirmation from the Holy Spirit. Like, okay, girl, open your mouth and speak about it, because there's someone listening that is dibbling and dabbling into sin, and you know, and you're aware of it, and you want to break free from it, but you don't know how to. Or you feel like maybe you're harping on what the Lord has delivered you from so much. There's power in your testimony. There's no need to condemn yourself. There's no need to be ashamed. Yes, it was hard for me to share this part of my story with many of you, because many of you are probably like shocked, like, wow, I would have never known. But I also believe that the Lord delivered me from those things so that I could speak on them now with boldness and clarity, and be able to articulate to you what it means to resist the devil, what it means to draw near to the Lord, to submit to God daily. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. 1, you don't just get free. You stay free by staying close to Jesus. 2, all sin matters, not just the ones we harp on. What is something subtle that might be keeping you from fully submitting to God? And resist, but don't just resist, draw near. The key to resisting sin isn't just saying no. It's saying yes to the Lord daily. I always like to say you need to dive into your word, even if you don't fully understand it in the beginning. This means you need to force yourself to talk to the Lord more. This means replacing some of that music you're listening to that is condoning that sinful behavior. Replace it with worship music. Replace it with some lo-fi music. Replace it. In the beginning, you might feel like you're forcing it, but that is how you draw near to the Lord. That is how you show the Lord that you truly want him to transform your heart and renew your mind. That is where the work is done, in the resisting and the drawing near. So I want to challenge you today to take some time today and ask the Lord, what are the things in my life that I've downplayed or overlooked? And whatever he reveals to you, I want to challenge you to submit it, resist it, and draw near. If this episode spoke to you, I want to encourage you to share it with a friend. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, subscribe and leave a review. And let's keep having these real conversations. It's forcing me to grow. It's forcing me to be honest, not just with you guys, but with the Lord, and to really look at myself and see where I am as well. We're in this together. So until next time, I love you all, and I will chat with you soon.